The HTTYD villain who was right all along. What if I told you the villain won? Not in the way villains usually win. Not through some twist ending or secret plan. Not by escaping. Not by surviving. Not by leaving a legacy of destruction. I mean something much worse than that. What if the villain won the argument? What if every single thing the main antagonist of How to Train Your Dragon, the hidden world, believed, every cold, brutal, supposedly monstrous thing he said about dragons, about humans, about the impossibility of coexistence? What if all of it turned out to be correct? What if Hiccup Haddock, the boy who changed the world, who built a civilization on the idea that humans and dragons could live together in peace? What if he spent 20 years of his life fighting for a dream, and then quietly, emotionally, heroically, admitted that the villain was right? Because that is exactly what happened at the end of the hidden world. And nobody talks about it. We remember the dragon flights. We remember the music swelling. We remember Hiccup and Astrid holding each other at the edge of the cliff, watching Toothless disappear into the clouds. We remember crying. We remember calling it a beautiful ending. We do not remember that in that same scene, Hiccup gave the exact speech that Grimmel the Grisly had been giving the entire movie. Word for word. Beat for beat. The same argument, the same conclusion. The world is not ready for dragons and humans to exist together. One of them has to go. Grimmel said that in Act 1. Hiccup said it in the final act, and we called him brave. So today, we are going to do something uncomfortable. We are going to actually listen to what Grimmel said. We are going to take his argument seriously, not because he was a good person, not because his methods were justified, but because the story itself proves him right. And we are going to trace exactly how to Train Your Dragon, across 3 films and multiple series, systematically validated every villain it ever created. Because it turns out, in the world of Berk, the villains kept losing the fights, but they never lost the argument. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to see this entire franchise completely differently. Let's start by actually understanding Grimmel the Grisly, because the movie does not want you to. The hidden world frames Grimmel in the most unflattering way possible from his very first scene. He's sitting in a dark room. He's surrounded by dead dragon heads mounted on the wall. He speaks with cold precision. He has no visible emotional attachments. He is designed to look like a monster so that you do not spend too much time actually processing what he's saying. Because what he's saying is not monstrous at all. His opening argument to the chiefs who hire him goes something like this: you have a dragon problem. The source of your dragon problem is Hiccup Haddock, who has convinced his people, and now your people, that dragons can be trusted. Hiccup is wrong. I know he is wrong because I have spent my entire life studying what dragons actually are beneath the mythology, beneath the bond, beneath the performance of loyalty. And what they actually are is a force that the human world cannot permanently contain. That is not the argument of a madman. That is the argument of an expert. Grimmel is, by every metric we have, the most knowledgeable dragon hunter in the Viking world. He has studied these creatures at a level no one else has. He has spent his life tracking them, understanding their biology, their behavior, their social structures. When he sets his traps, they work. When he makes predictions, they come true. He understood the Light Fury's instincts and exploited them perfectly. He understood Toothless's psychology and used it against him. This is not luck. This is mastery. And the foundation of his mastery is a single core belief. Dragons are wild animals. They are not pets. They are not companions. They are not partners. They are predators with extraordinary power, governed by instinct and hierarchy. And no amount of human affection changes that fundamental nature. He says something to Hiccup that I want you to really sit with. He says that what Hiccup has built is not coexistence, it's control. And the moment that control breaks, which it always does because control always breaks, people will die. Ask yourself, in the context of this franchise, is he wrong? Here is where I need you to think like a historian and not like a fan. Forget how the movies made you feel. Forget the music, the animation, the voice acting. Just look at the events of the franchise as if you were reading a report of what actually happened. Berk, under Hiccup's leadership, is attacked repeatedly. Not by strangers, by dragons that Hiccup's own people trusted. In How to Train Your Dragon 2, Drago Bludvist arrives with a bewilderbeast, an alpha-class dragon, and in one moment he turns every dragon on Berk against their riders. Every bond, every year of trust, every relationship built on patience and love and mutual understanding, gone, instantly, because the hierarchy overrode the bond. Toothless, the most loyal dragon in the franchise, the dragon who is essentially Hiccup's soul in animal form, turns around and fires a plasma blast directly at his best friend. If Stoic had not stepped in front of that blast, Hiccup would have died, killed by his own dragon, the one he trusted more than any other living creature. Grimmel would not have been surprised by this at all. He would have said, "I told you. The hierarchy always wins. The instinct always wins. You do not own a dragon's loyalty. You borrow it from the alpha, and the alpha can take it back at any moment." And he would have been right. Now go further back. How to Train Your Dragon 1. The Red Death. An entire island of dragons, for generations, forced to raid human villages and bring back food, not because they wanted to, but because the alpha compelled them. These are not evil dragons. They are not cruel. They are doing exactly what their evolutionary programming forces them to do when an alpha commands it. What does this tell us? It tells us that every dragon's behavior, at its deepest level, is contingent on hierarchy. The moment a stronger alpha enters the picture, all bets are off. Hiccup's entire peace project is built on the assumption that the alpha stays benevolent, that no one ever shows up with a bigger dragon, that the hierarchy never gets disrupted. Grimmel's entire argument is, you cannot build a civilization on that assumption. He's not wrong. Go to the TV series, Race to the Edge. Dragon after dragon is weaponized against Hiccup's riders. The dragon hunters capture bonded dragons and turn them into weapons with shocking regularity. The dragons don't betray their riders out of malice. They are controlled, manipulated, coerced, because they can be. Because the mechanisms exist in their biology to override whatever bond they've formed. Every single time this happens, it validates Grimmel's thesis. And nobody in the franchise ever says, maybe we need to rethink the premise. Maybe the premise itself is flawed. Nobody except Grimmel. This is the part of the analysis that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about. Hiccup is one of the great arguers in animated film history. He changes minds. He walks into rooms full of people who want to kill him and walks out with allies. He convinced a tribe of Vikings, the most dragon-terrified people on the planet, to not just tolerate dragons, but to love them. He is extraordinarily persuasive. Watch him debate every villain before Grimmel. Alvin the Treacherous. Hiccup finds the common ground. He demonstrates the alternative. He shows what a world with peaceful dragons looks like, and Alvin's worldview shifts. Dagur the Deranged. Hiccup eventually reaches him, finds the brother underneath the warlord, and Dagur becomes an ally. Riker and Vigo Grimborn. Hiccup outmaneuvers them, outsmarts them, and though they don't convert, Hiccup wins the philosophical battle by proving that dragon-human cooperation produces better outcomes. Drago Bludvist. Hiccup walks up to him at the end of the second film, unarmed, and tries to reach him. He doesn't succeed. Drago is too far gone, but Hiccup tries. He argues. He makes his case. With Grimmel, he doesn't make his case. He never once sits down with Grimmel and says, "Here is why you're wrong. Here is the counter-evidence." Here is what your worldview is missing. He doesn't do it because I believe, on some level, he can't. Because Grimmel isn't making an emotional argument that can be answered with an emotional appeal. He's making an empirical argument about how the world works, and the empirical evidence largely supports him. What would Hiccup even say? Dragons are loyal. Toothless tried to kill him under alpha control. We can coexist peacefully. Berk has been attacked, burned, and nearly destroyed repeatedly. I've proven it works. He's proven it works when conditions are ideal. Grimmel is arguing about what happens when conditions stop being ideal. There is no clean counter-argument, which is why the movie never gives Hiccup one. Instead, the hidden world resolves the conflict not by proving Grimmel wrong, but by removing the conditions that make his argument necessary. The dragons leave. The conflict disappears. Not because the philosophical debate was settled, but because one side of the equation was physically removed from the world. That is not a rebuttal. That is a concession. Now I want to zoom out because Grimmel is not the only villain this franchise quietly validated. He's just the most obvious example of a pattern that runs through every antagonist in this universe. Let's talk about Drago Bludvist first, because his argument is even darker than Grimmel's, and the movie proves him right just as thoroughly. Drago's worldview is this: dragons cannot be trusted. They must be dominated. A dragon that is bonded is still a dragon that can be taken. The only real security is absolute control. The film presents this as villainy, and Drago himself is monstrous, scarred, furious, willing to do anything. But look at what the film actually shows us. The moment Drago's bewilderbeast establishes alpha dominance, every bonded dragon on Berk turns against its rider. The Gronkle that a child has been flying for years. The deadly natter that Astrid has trained and trusted. Toothless himself. All of them. Gone. In an instant. Drago's argument was, your bonds are not real security. They are contingent on conditions you don't control. He was right. In the film that kills him, he is proven right. The narrative asks us to feel triumph when Toothless defeats the bewilderbeast and the dragons return to their riders. And it is triumphant. Emotionally, it works perfectly. But take one step back. What actually happened? Toothless became the new alpha. The dragons returned because the hierarchy reshuffled, not because the bonds were stronger than alpha control. If another dragon had become alpha, they would have stayed loyal to it. The riders didn't win because love overcame instinct. They won because the right dragon won the alpha battle. Drago's premise was never defeated. It was just turned against him. Now, let's talk about Viggo Grimborn from Race to the Edge, because his argument is subtler, but just as damning. Viggo's worldview is essentially economic and strategic. Dragons are a resource. They are extraordinarily valuable as weapons, as tools, as commodities. The idea of keeping them as pets while the rest of the world wants to weaponize them is naive at best, and suicidal at worst. Hiccup defeats Viggo, multiple times. But what happens to the broader world that Viggo was describing? The dragon hunters continue to operate. Other warlords continue to seek dragons as weapons. The demand that Viggo was exploiting doesn't disappear when he disappears. It increases. It spreads. By the time the hidden world begins, the entire world is sending armies to capture Berk's dragons. Not because Viggo won, because Viggo was correctly describing something real. The economic and strategic logic he articulated was accurate. Dragons are extraordinarily valuable as weapons. Any civilization that has them becomes a target. Any civilization that doesn't have them will want them. The idea that this dynamic could be reversed through demonstration and goodwill was always optimistic to the point of delusion. Viggo was wrong about many things. He was not wrong about that. And then there's the dragon hunters as a collective entity. The idea running through Race to the Edge, that wild dragons represent an inherent danger to settled human civilization, and that the responsible thing is to contain or eliminate that danger. Hiccup's response across 5 seasons is, no, we can integrate them. We can build a world where dragons and humans coexist. At the end of the franchise, dragons leave the human world entirely. Who was right? We need to talk about the Night Furies specifically because this is where Grimmel's story becomes genuinely tragic. He hunted Night Furies to extinction. He is, by his own admission, personally responsible for the death of an entire species. In the context of the movie, this is meant to be his defining act of evil, his monstrous credential. But let's actually think about what Night Furies are. They are called the unholy offspring of lightning and death itself. They are the fastest, most agile, most intelligent, most powerful dragons in the known world. They can fire precise plasma blasts with extraordinary range and accuracy. They fly faster than any other species. They are effectively invisible at night. They are so dangerous that the Dragon Manual, which covers hundreds of species, says only speed unknown, size unknown, kill on sight. That is the Viking assessment of the Night Fury. Don't even try to fight it. Just run. And Grimmel hunted every single one of them down. Now ask yourself, what happens if he doesn't? What happens if Night Furies still exist in numbers when Drago Bloodfist arrives? When the dragon hunters are at their most powerful? When the warlords are gathering armies? Night Furies under Alpha control are the most terrifying military force imaginable. Multiple Toothless level dragons, invisible, fast, firing plasma blasts with perfect accuracy, completely loyal to whoever controls the Alpha. Grimmel may have looked at Night Furies and thought, this species, specifically in a world where Alpha control exists, is too dangerous to allow to survive in numbers. That is not madness. That is a cold, horrible, arguably rational strategic calculation. It is the same calculation that humans have made throughout history about technologies and powers they could not safely contain. Sometimes the thing is too dangerous to exist. Grimmel made that call about Night Furies and then spent decades executing it. The loneliness of that, the weight of carrying that conviction, that is not the psychology of a sadist. That is the psychology of someone who believes they are doing something necessary and terrible and has accepted what that makes them. He tells Hiccup, essentially, I was you once. I found a Night Fury. I looked into its eyes. I saw the intelligence, the beauty, the connection, and then I killed it because I understood what it was and what it would become if I let it live. He made the hard choice that Hiccup has been refusing to make his entire life. The tragedy of Grimmel is not that he was wrong. It's that he may have been right, and he had to become a monster to act on being right. Let's go to the ending of the hidden world and really look at it. Hiccup stands at the edge of the hidden world. Toothless is there. They've saved the dragons. Grimmel is dead. Hiccup won. And then Hiccup says something that should have broken the audience's heart for a completely different reason than it did. He says that the world isn't ready. He says that as long as dragons exist among humans, they will never be safe. He says that the only way to protect the dragons is to send them somewhere that humans cannot reach them. And he does it. He sets them free. He watches Toothless disappear. He cries. We cry. Beautiful scene. Devastating score. Perfect animation. But wait. Hiccup just validated everything Grimmel said. He didn't say, we'll keep fighting until the world accepts them. He didn't say, our work isn't done, but we'll continue. He said, this cannot work. The world as it exists cannot sustain what I've been trying to build. That is Grimmel's thesis, delivered by the hero of the story, scored with emotional music and presented as wisdom. Now think about what this means for Hiccup's entire arc. He lost his father because of his commitment to dragon-human coexistence. Stoic Haddock died taking a plasma blast meant for Hiccup, a plasma blast fired by Toothless, under alpha control. Hiccup's father died because of a consequence that Grimmel had specifically identified as inevitable. He spent years building the Edge, fighting the dragon hunters, navigating political chaos across the archipelago, all in service of a world where dragons and humans coexist. He became chief of Berk and made that coexistence the foundation of his entire leadership. And then, after all of that, he stood at the edge of a cliff and said, "It can't work. Not yet. Maybe someday. But not now. Not in this world." Grimmel didn't need to win. He just needed to be patient. Because eventually, Hiccup's love for the dragons was going to make him see the same thing Grimmel saw. That the world they lived in was not built for both of them. The only difference was that Hiccup came to this conclusion with tears in his eyes instead of cold pragmatism in his chest. Grimmel saw the destination from the beginning. Hiccup took 20 years to get there, and he suffered a great deal along the way. Here is the question how to train your dragon. The hidden world is afraid to ask directly, but that the entire film is actually about. When Hiccup sends the dragons to the hidden world, is that an act of love or an act of defeat? The film presents it as love. Pure love. He loves the dragons so much that he sets them free. He loves Toothless so much that he's willing to lose him forever to keep him safe. But I want you to consider the other reading. What if it's an admission that Grimmel was right about the world? That human civilization, as it exists, is fundamentally incompatible with dragon freedom. That no matter how hard Hiccup fought, no matter what he built, the forces arrayed against coexistence were simply too powerful, too numerous, too structural to overcome. What if the ending of the hidden world is not Hiccup choosing love over selfishness, but Hiccup accepting reality over idealism? Because think about the practical situation at the start of the film. Every warlord in the world wants Berk's dragons. Armies are coming. The conflict is not going away. It is accelerating. The world is not softening its position on dragons. It is hardening. Hiccup has no path to winning this. He can keep fighting, but eventually, they will be overwhelmed. The dragons will be captured or killed. His people will suffer. The hidden world is not a choice between love and selfishness. It's a choice between two kinds of loss. Lose the dragons slowly and violently as the world closes in, or lose them quickly and peacefully on your own terms. He chose the second option, and he called it love. But underneath it is the tacit acknowledgement that Grimmel was describing something real when he talked about the impossibility of coexistence. If you accept this reading, and I think the evidence makes it difficult not to, then the entire HTTYD franchise takes on a completely different meaning. It is no longer a story about a boy who changed the world. It is a story about a boy who tried to change the world, fought with extraordinary courage and love and creativity for 2 decades, and discovered that the world was more resistant to change than he was powerful to change it. It is a tragedy dressed up as a triumph. Think about every film through this lens. How to Train Your Dragon. Hiccup proves that one dragon can be trained. The village accepts it. This feels like a beginning, and it is. But it's a beginning that contains its own end, because the logic that makes one dragon trainable also makes every dragon exploitable, weaponizable, targetable by anyone who wants power. How to Train Your Dragon 2. Hiccup's world is at its largest and most hopeful. Dragon riders everywhere. Alliances built on dragon-human bonds. A future that seems genuinely possible. And in this film, all of it is nearly destroyed in minutes when a larger alpha arrives. The message is, your peace is fragile. It depends on conditions you do not control. The hidden world. The world has decided it does not want Hiccup's peace. The decision is collective, structural, historical. It is not one villain's ambition that threatens Berk this time. It is the entire geopolitical reality of the world. Grimmel is the instrument of that reality. And the film ends not with the world being changed, but with the dragons being removed from it. The arc of the franchise is: boy discovers coexistence is possible. Boy builds coexistence. World destroys coexistence. Boy learns coexistence was only possible in the absence of the forces that always existed. That is a genuinely dark story. It is dressed in beautiful animation and soaring music, but the bones of it are heartbreaking. Hiccup didn't change the world. The world changed him. Now I want to tell you the most devastating thing about Grimmel the Grisly. Not the most evil thing, not the most monstrous thing, the most devastating thing. He didn't enjoy being right. Go back and watch his scenes again, knowing everything we've just talked about. Listen to how he talks about the night furies. Listen to the exhaustion underneath the precision. Listen to how he describes what Hiccup has built on Berk, not with contempt, but with something closer to grief. He knows what Hiccup built. He understands what it means. He's not blind to the beauty of it. He just believes it cannot last. And he has been watching it not last, over and over, across his entire career. And no one listened. No one ever listened. They built their bonds and trusted their dragons, and called men like Grimmel monsters. And then the Alpha arrived, or the Hunter came, or the Warlord sent his army, and they were surprised, horrified, brokenhearted, that the thing he'd warned them about had happened. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being right about something terrible, and watching the people around you refuse to see it until the terrible thing arrives. Grimmel has lived with that loneliness his entire life. He found his night fury. The movie doesn't linger on this. It's almost a throwaway line, but he found one. He looked at it. He made his decision, and he killed it. And then he spent the rest of his life carrying the weight of what he'd done, and what he believed, and why he believed it. That is not a villain origin story. That is a tragedy. And the final tragedy is this: Grimmel dies believing he failed. The Night Furies survived. Toothless and the Light Fury escape, and they will have offspring. The species continues. Grimmel dies thinking the thing he spent his life preventing has survived him. But here's what Grimmel doesn't see. He doesn't see the ending of the film. He doesn't see Hiccup stand at the edge of the hidden world and say, "You were right. The world isn't ready. I'm sending them away." He doesn't see that the man who defeated him, the man who represented everything he'd fought against, ultimately arrived at the same conclusion that had defined Grimmel's entire existence. Grimmel died thinking he lost. He won. He won more completely than he could have imagined, because not only did the dragons leave the human world, the person who loved them most was the one who sent them away. Hiccup built the most beautiful argument against Grimmel's worldview that has ever existed. He built it with his life. And then he took it apart himself, piece by piece, at the edge of a cliff while the music played and we cried. The villains lost every fight, but they never lost the argument. And that is the thing about this franchise that nobody wants to say out loud. Grimmel was right. Drago was right. The dragon hunters were right. Not in their methods, not in their cruelty, not in the way they pursued their beliefs, but in the underlying premise that the world Hiccup was building was not sustainable, that the forces arrayed against coexistence were too powerful, that eventually the dream would break against the reality of what the world actually was. They were all right.
And Hiccup was the most beautiful, most heartbreaking proof of it.
So here's where I leave you. The next time you watch The Hidden World, and you should watch it again now because it's a completely different film once you see this, I want you to watch Grimmel differently. Don't watch him as the monster. Don't watch him as the obstacle. Watch him as the only character who can see the ending from the beginning. Watch him look at Hiccup with something that is almost pity. Because Grimmel knows what Hiccup is about to learn. He knows that you can love something with everything you have and still lose it. He knows that love is not an argument. Love is not a strategy. Love is not strong enough to reshape a world that has decided what it wants. He knows that Hiccup is going to stand at the edge of that cliff. He just doesn't live long enough to see it happen. That is one of the most carefully constructed tragic ironies in animated film history. And it's hidden underneath a movie that most people remember as a tearjerker about a boy and his dragon. Drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know, do you think Hiccup made the right choice at the end of the hidden world? Or did the world win? Was Grimmel the villain? Or was he the only honest person in the room? Because I've been sitting with this for a long time and I still don't have a clean answer. And I think that's exactly what DreamWorks intended. If this broke something in you, good. Subscribe to Berk Files, because this is what we do here. We find the truths that DreamWorks buried in the animation and the music and the beautiful flying sequences, and we make you feel them. I'll see you in the next one.